Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the AfricanMusicLaw.com show. I'm your host, Miss Uduak. This is the 166th episode of the show. And I know a couple of weeks now I've been off. Lots to do on the litigation end with the law firm. So did not have the opportunity to host this, but I'm excited to be back on to continue. Now, if you're just joining us for the first time, before we get to a very interesting case that some of you have sought my opinion on, and I'm genuinely also very interested in talking about. Let me just tell you who we are, what we do, and then we'll delve into this particular case. Very interesting case. So, who we are the African Music Law Show, and more specifically, what we do here is empowering the African artist, wherever that artist may be around the world, all kinds of continents, and not just limited to empowering the African artist, but literally empowering the creative industry at large across the spectrum. So we cover everything with respect to the latest pop culture news that intersects with the law, take on the issues, analyze, give legal commentary. That's what you're going to see me do today. And in addition, we invite some really amazing guests within the industry, many of whom are part of our community, to come on and share their perspectives on the different legal issues or just their career trajectory. How do they get to where they are? What can our audience learn from them? And then, of course, those who are responsible for some of the big names you see across diverse screens across the globe. So they come and they share their insights, whether they be management, whether they be attorneys, whether they be any part of, public relations specialists, whatever the case may be. That's what we do here. How can you reach us? How can you be a part of what we're doing? Very easy. Let me put that up for you so you know. So you can easily find us on, by subscribing to our newsletter. So here you go. You should see the scrolling there about where to sign up for our newsletter. You can easily do that. If you are more focused on the podcast, you can easily subscribe on all major podcast streaming platforms. Great news for our listeners as well for podcasts. I just received notification. I've not had time to delve into it, but you can now say, Alexa, play African Music Law, and should be able to find our show easily as well. So that's a big thing and exciting through Amazon Music, among others. So one of the things I've noticed, and I want to give a quick shout out before I continue, I was just looking at the podcast stats not too long before getting on. And it used to be, it was the US, Nigeria, US, UK, Ghana, at least the top four, and top four platforms. I mean, top four countries that we were really attracting audience and viewership, and then everything else. And now it's very interesting. It's the US, India, Nigeria, Senegal, and the UK. So that's so interesting. I want to give a big shout out to Indian viewers. I am a big Indian fan. I've been in so many ways, Bollywood movies, the cuisine, among other things. And I've been very saturated for a very long time in the Indian culture and environment. So to me, it's really heartwarming. Actually, my lifestyle includes that, because almost on a weekend basis, every weekend, I go and do a lot of my shopping at my local Indian grocery store. So for me, it's an extra icing on the cake to hear that we have viewers and listeners in India, and a very strong showing as well. So welcome to you, and thanks for being a part of the African Music Law family and the show as well. So moving along with that, that's how you can subscribe. Another way to do to join us and ensure that we continue to be found in these different countries and attract people who really need to hear this is you can feel free to rate us on Apple Podcasts, and that ensures as well, which with respect to search engine optimization, that we can easily be found. Also, as we continue here, please feel free to leave your comments in the comments section, and we may read it live here. So please, as we get into it, feel free to do so. And finally, in terms of just the preliminaries specific to where you can find African Music Law, visit africanmusiclaw.com for who and what we are and a lot more. So having said that, let's get down to it. And what we're going to be talking about today, the Travis Scott situation. Very tragic situation. And the central question that I'm asking here is, who should be liable? You get to play jury with me specifically, and I'll set out the facts, the legal allegations, some of the causes of action that have been filed. So far so good, over 200 lawsuits among other things. And then I want to hear your perspective on what you think should be, or who you think should be liable. So feel free as I continue to bring the comments and bring that comment in throughout. Let's see here. A quick disclaimer. So yes, I own and operate African Music Law. That's the media company, but I'm also a lawyer, and my work includes, I've been practicing for about 20 years now. So my work includes actually heavily more so litigation trial work and deal making as well. And I concentrate on representing those in the entertainment industry, fashion and entertainment law. So as I talk about this case, it's not meant to be direct advice to you if you're watching it. It's more legal information. If you have a specific situation that's specific to you and you're interested in working with me for that purpose, then please feel free to visit me at my law firm website, FASHIONENTLAW.com, and you are more than welcome then to set up a consultation through that. But for all intended purposes, for this platform, African Music Law, it's really strictly just informational purposes. So let's get into it on what we're talking about today. Here's where I want to start, by focusing on what we know. So far, so good. So what do we know? We know that we've got, so far, based on all the reporting on this particular case, that we've got about 300 injured people, at least 9 dead, unfortunately, and over 23 people hospitalized. It's a very tragic situation that occurred in Texas. It's supposed to be a concert. Usually when you go to a concert or a festival to enjoy yourself with your favorite artist, you don't expect to suffer all kinds of injuries and worse, find people dying, or unfortunately be in a situation where you are unfortunately deceased and your family is grieving over you. It's just really, really horrible situation. There's no getting around the very gruesome facts that have happened here. But the question then is, who do we hold liable for all of these things that occurred? So knowing who is injured so far and the amount of folks that are unfortunately dead and those that have been hospitalized, let's start parsing it out. And what I did was I went and looked at, because there's so many reportings, and so when you have a lot of people reporting, lots of media, there tends to be confusion on allegations and the accuracy of facts. So what I did do is just look at the pleadings. So there are over 200 lawsuits filed, and at least I took a look at some of the lawsuits from different attorneys indicating what their own factual allegations are and the causes of action. So this is directly some of the things I'm talking about or summarizing is based on the renditions and my interpretation of those renditions by these different attorneys on the claims that they filed on behalf of their clients. So let's start first here with the plaintiffs. Who are the plaintiffs generally? So when you have this kind of cause of action or this kind of scenario, the plaintiffs are obviously going to be those who have been directly physically injured and or emotionally as well. So it's not just physical injury, also emotional injury affected, negligent infliction of emotional distress, observing and seeing people fall all over you, the chaotic mayhem, the crowd surge, the distress that came from it, and of course, those who are physically injured and the estate of the deceased. So those who have unfortunately passed, their family members get to be able to stand in their behalf to file the appropriate lawsuit, which generally will be that wrongful death action that is filed. So those are the plaintiffs. Who are the defendants? The defendants are quite a lot. Lots of defendants that have been sued in this instance. So if you look down at the screen, you'll see some of the people that I've identified as the defendants. We've got Travis Scott, who is performing, Drake, Live Nation, ASM Global Inc., Harris County Sports and Convention Corporation, the venue where that was held, Apple Inc., and I know some of you might find that interesting. I'll share some more why Apple is being pulled into this. Sasha Stone, Godfred, and many, many more. So let me now reference some of my notes that I've written here with respect to who some of these individuals are. Travis Scott, we already know, is a performer. And this is a very interesting thing I've seen and I've talked about over the years and encourage artists to really, really think through when you want to cut out the middleman or woman with respect to event organization and event planning, you want to now be the concept promoter. One of the things I've said over and over again is you must ensure that you have the competency and the ability to do that, because if you don't, then you run a big risk of legal liability. So the legal liability is no longer just exclusively on the event organizers. Now you, the performer that's invited to perform, you've now taken on a different role, and that role really opens you up to even more liability. And we'll see how this plays out too as we continue to talk about it. So Travis Scott, further defining who the defendants are, is not only in this capacity an organizer of the event, he's also a performer. And that goes to the point I just shared. Once you start stepping in and doing a little more than typical, because you essentially want to cut out the middleman and leave more in your pocket, you have to know that there are a lot more responsibilities and risk and liabilities that come with that. All right. And then again, folks, feel free to leave comments at the bottom, and I will be pulling that in throughout, as I mentioned. Let me just ensure that you know to leave your comments, and we'll pull that in into the show to see right there. All right. So going back to, we've said Travis Scott had a dual role as a performer and an organizer. Then we've got Drake the performer. And it's going to be very, very interesting. Pay attention, all artists, pay attention, artist representatives. When you have someone like Drake going to perform at another main artist's concert, it becomes critical to ensure you talk to that lawyer and ensure that that agreement that you're getting into will not expose you to this kind of liability. And to the degree it does, it really has not as much bite, because you just showed up to perform and you didn't expect that all of these things would happen. So we'll see how the lawyers lay it out for purposes of why Drake is being pulled in here. Then we've got Live Nation as well, who's part of the organizers as well. And then we've got a management company, Scoremore. Actually, no, that Scoremore is related, some sort of subsidiary for Live Nation. If the based on what I see is accurate in terms of the reporting of who Scoremore Holdings are. Then there is ASM Global Parent Inc., and they manage the stadium on behalf of Harris County Sports and Convention Corporation. And then there's also Contemporary Services Corporation, which is a crowd management firm. Obviously, their argument is that they did not necessarily manage it that well. And then there is Apple Inc. And it's so interesting that we have Apple Inc., because you're thinking, why is Apple being dragged into this? I'll explain a little bit more. Now, what's very interesting is they also sue the producer. And technically, some lawyers are saying HPD, Houston Police Department, should be pulled into it. And one of the reasons why is that for Houston Police, let me show right here. Technically, one of the basis for pulling HPD is because they had over 528 Houston police officers at the event. Notwithstanding that, when the event was supposed to stop so that they could attend to victims of this crowd surge, it didn't happen. So some attorneys are talking about potentially pinning HPD or dragging them into the lawsuits. Then you've also got the fact that Live Nation had over 755 private security personnel on hand. Notwithstanding that, we see all of the chaos and unfortunately the injuries and death that ensued. So let's break it down. I'm breaking it down based on, from my perspective, a trial lawyer perspective, and the people you would sue, and sort of walking you through how the lawsuits generally work. And then we'll go even into it a little bit more. There's some questions that are coming in. Oh, comments. So let's see. We've got Ferodun Bakeshli. Ferodun Bakeshli, thanks for watching. He says, I'm not sure about the legality of the tragedy. When a certain authority issues permissions to organize an event, who will make the compensation once there's an accident? And then excellent program, very informative. Thank you so much. We'll see all of that. That's what we're here to talk about, the legality of it all and what it means. This are based on some of the lawsuits that have been filed so far, so good. So thank you for watching. Keep watching. Let's get more into it. So first things first, most attorneys, trial lawyers, when they're filing a suit and they've identified the defendants, they have their plaintiffs, the people they're representing, they bring in the action. The first thing they have to figure out is, what's the proper venue? to file this lawsuit, because if you don't have the proper venue, obviously that's an issue. Then the courts don't have the power to hear the case at the particular location you've decided you want the case to be heard. So it has to be a venue where this can properly be heard. So far, so good. The venue for this, so we've seen Harris County, Texas, where the event occurred and where some defendants can be found as well. So and also where injuries were sustained as well. So mostly Texas, but definitely California as well. California law would allow a plaintiff to sue in the event where again, similar set of facts, and similar set of criteria in terms of where injuries occur and where some defendants as well can be found. So in this instance, we've got Apple Inc. based in California. Drake is allegedly based in California, a resident of California. Travis Scott, same thing. And we've got some of the other companies that are California based, including the crowd management firm. So for those who may have attended in Houston and are from California, or even if they're not, maybe have some sort of tie to California and prefer to sue in this jurisdiction in California, and that's where I'm based, they certainly can do that as well. So that's where the lawsuit is taking place. Now, after you identify the venue, now you've got to lay out the facts and tell the court what you believe gives rise to the situation you're asking for compensation or damages on behalf of your client. So in this instance, a lot of what we're seeing, and I'm going to go through the allegations based on some of the notes that I took down, and we'll walk through it. But I've highlighted some key timelines. We've got a 3 a.m., 10 a.m., 3:30 p.m., 8:15 p.m., and 9 p.m. And we'll see how that becomes very, very relevant throughout as we're talking. So first things first, that happened November 5th, it's a Friday, 2021. The Astroworld concert is held at the Harris County Sports and Convention Corporation, aka NRG Stadium. It's in Houston, Texas. And at that concert, we know Drake performed. We also know Travis Scott performed. So how do we know that? Because, of course, let's back up a little bit. Another thing is that we know that the crowd was difficult to control, and the allegations by the lawyers so far so good. A lot of the filings have said, you know what, not only was the crowd difficult to control, the defendants knew it was possible that the crowd would be difficult to control. So how do you know that? Here are what some of them have said. Some of them have said, well, you know what, in 2019, you had the same Astroworld Festival and a similar scenario happened. And in that situation, the concert was poorly planned, poorly designed, poorly managed. And as a result, you had the crowds where they were overwhelming the staff, security staff, and just concert staff, festival concert staff as a whole. They were breaking gates and they were rushing entrance. So that was one indication that this one might have similar problems. In addition, many have cited that Travis Scott had a pattern and practice of disorderly conduct, and that he had a tendency to encourage his fans to engage in disorderly conduct. And how do we know that? They point to a 2015 arrest for disorderly conduct in Chicago for allegedly inciting violence by encouraging his fans to breach barriers. And then in 2017, they cite that he was arrested for a similar situation in Arkansas. And then in 2017, unfortunately, a fan suffered injuries at Travis Scott's New York concert when the fan was pushed off a balcony by a frenzied crowd. What's so interesting to me, part of my experience is criminal defense work. So what's so interesting to me is there's obviously a statement to be made that, or an argument to be made that just because you are, especially in the capacity of a performer, you're not the artist organizing the event, as we see roles shift where Travis Scott actually organizes this event as well. But if you're exclusively performing at a concert, it almost seems, you know that things are going to get crazy and out of hand. So why is the artist the one being charged with inciting violence or being arrested for a similar situation? So objectively, at least on a criminal defense side, it's sort of like, okay, why are you pinning that on him? Whereas there are countless concerts that we've seen over time, and artists performing and crowds going crazy, but we never really pin that on the artist. So what's so different about this artist that in 2015, 2017, we would pin that to him, especially when he wasn't the one organizing. All of those should have just laid at the feet of the organizers of the event. So there's something to be said for that in terms of how much weight you give that. But ultimately, he was arrested for it. I don't see a conviction, though. And then also the indication of a fan suffering, unfortunately, injuries at the Travis Scott concert. All right, and then so those are examples of, there's a pattern and practice here. This is not news. We didn't just show up and wake up and say, hey, this is not foreseeable. This defendant, and along with all the other defendants that did business with him, knew or should have known that this particular type of injuries would occur. There's also a research by Houston Chronicle and NPR saying that Live Nation has been linked to approximately 200 deaths and 750 injuries in the past 15 years as organizers of events as well. So if you look at this pattern and practice, their argument basically it's foreseeable that this particular kind of injuries would happen, especially given who was performing, Travis Scott. So that's that. And then let's go here to some of the timelines I was mentioning. So let's start with that 3 a.m. specific to this facts and what is alleged. What is alleged is that November 5th at 3 a.m., you have 1,000 fans gathering, waiting to get past the gate. 10 a.m., the gates open and allegedly is chaotic in terms of the fans rushing through the gates. Then you've got the 9 p.m. slot where Travis Scott was supposed to perform. The stage is about $5 million. It's set up for him to perform. But between 10 a.m. and 9 p.m., Houston Police Chief Officer Troy Finer goes to Travis in his trailer and says, I'm concerned about the crowd. I'm concerned. It appears he's discussing safety. What should we do about it? Or I don't know what the full scope of the discussion was, but he essentially brought it up to Travis Scott saying, I'm concerned about this. Now, if you're watching this, what I want you to do in the comment section is, as I go through some of these key timelines here, tell me what duty you believe at that point is owed by Travis Scott or all the other defendants. So we have one key thing here, a red flag. A chief police officer comes and says, I'm concerned. What do you think should have been happening at that point? It doesn't really state the specific timeline. It's just between 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. So that's the first thing that happens. So what duty at that point do you believe that Travis Scott owes to all of the ticket holders that are coming in to watch him? So let's see here. So the crowd is about 50,000 people strong. And by 3:30 p.m., the allegation, this comment coming in, let's see if it answers that. Okay, so Mfun Asian says the duty would be to double check the safety measures in place. All right, that's a very strong argument, absolutely, because Travis Scott could easily have said, okay, no problem, let's double check. Although the facts are silent on what his response was. We're just informed that the chief police officer said to him, there's a security related issue. And you are right. Part of what he should probably be thinking about is, let's go ahead and double check that and checking with everybody else. Okay, so thank you so much for that, Mfun Asian. All right, so the next timeline is by 3:30 p.m. And by 3:30 p.m., the first group of casualties of victims are seeking medical attention and they begin rolling in. But the key fact that is alleged is that the medical staff are insufficient and already overwhelmed at 3:30 p.m. So again, I pose that question to you. What duty then at 3:30 p.m., now that there is an issue that we know that people are getting injured and that victims are rolling in and medical staff is attending to them even before Travis Scott gets on stage to perform? So there's that timeline and that particular 3:30 p.m. So please let me know what you think the duty should be at that point as well. So by 8:15 p.m., so we're moving along here. We're at 8:15 p.m. And at 8:15 p.m., the medical staff on site allegedly is unable to even handle the amount of patients that are coming in. They're not even able to document that. So what do? They have non-medical trained staff to help them with just beginning to triage people. So what duty do the defendants have? Travis Scott is not on stage yet. We know that all of this back end injuries are happening. Medical staff is overwhelmed to the point where they don't even have enough people, and regular folks step in to try to help medical staff. So is someone not knowing about this? Who should be knowing about it? Who's organizing that? And at the beginning, I mentioned about over 528 police officers on site, 725 security personnel from Live Nation. What are they all doing? That's like over 1,000 people, at least 1,200 people. Where are they? Aren't they seeing this? Are they reporting back to Travis Scott that there's an issue? Are they reporting back to Arbery, aka Drake, that there's an issue? Are they reporting to anyone? Live Nation? Where are all these people? So that's at 8:15 p.m. What's the duty, or do we still go back to what Mfon said? Double check the safety measures in place at 8:15 when you're having all of these injuries rolling in. How can you not know? Are you using walkie-talkies so everybody's just tuning on? Hey, what's going on here? That all this medical injuries happening. We need to maybe stop or rethink how we have this thing set up. So that's that. And then we have 9 p.m. So 9 p.m. The allegation is that the energy of the crowd changes. Travis is now performing. And this is when allegedly things really intensify, and you have the 50,000 crowd just moving and pushing forward towards the stage to the point where people are having difficulty breathing. A mosh pit, of course, happens. As we know now, it's chaotic. The crowd is completely uncontrollable. A stampede ensues. And some people are actually a few people are able to get on stage to say, hey, stop the music, stop. We need help. There are people dying and there are people getting injured. But however, the staff were not concerned. And we've seen a lot of videos shared all over social media where we've seen a lot of this situation take, like we could see it in real time, or some in real time and then some after the fact of what we're talking about here. And all of those social media videos, by the way, is obviously evidence. It's going to come in for purposes of the trial, if we should even get to the trial level. So the question I'll ask you is, what duty at this point does any of the defendant have in light of all of these things that we are hearing about? So far, so good. All right, let's see here. Drake is a surprise guest that shows up to perform alongside Travis Scott. What duty does he have? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a quick break, let you all quickly think through that, and we will be back to continue in less than or about 30 seconds. So let's take a quick break so you can marinate on it and tell me what you're thinking with what duty, and then we will segue into, of course, talking about the causes of actions and the legal allegations being made. You're the jury today. You're listening and you're telling me what perspective you have on this issue. So you're listening for the podcast listeners that are going to hear this, and you're watching the AfricanMusicLaw.com show with your host, Miss Uduak. I'll be right back. All right, we are officially back, and I asked you what duty does all of these defendants have at this point. We've gone through several timelines, right? So let's go back to those timelines, key timelines. 3 a.m., 10 a.m., 3:30 p.m., 8:15 p.m., 9 p.m. Throughout, what we know is that people are getting injured. Medical staff is trying to help. Medical staff is getting overwhelmed. What's happening to all the security in the police department? Where is everyone? We don't seem to know. So what duty do any of those defendants, including Travis Scott, have towards all of these ticket holders that are there to enjoy the show, but unfortunately are getting injured? Let's see what William Gary has. William says 2 questions. What was the capacity of this venue? What are the ratios of medical personnel to attendees typically for concerts of this size? Great question. I don't know, did not research into the capacity of the venue. Feel free to look that up and please share that information. And I think the question for the medical personnel to attendees is also a great question. I don't necessarily know that answer, but I would think that if you and I don't, more facts are emerging, but I would think at least even if you don't have sufficient medical personnel, because I don't know how many were even on staff for this. The capacity, actually, no, I remember now, the capacity for that particular stadium was allegedly 100,000 people. However, it was only 50,000. So technically, they should have been able to control the crowd. So it would seem to support the arguments by a lot of the attorneys who have filed the lawsuit that the staff weren't medically trained. I mean, the medical staff and everybody on site weren't properly or fully trained, because if they are, they should have been able to handle that for a venue that has about 100,000. But the other question that you have, William, on the typical ratio, I don't necessarily have that specific answer, but I do think it's a great question, particularly as to this as well. If anyone knows, please feel free to leave those comments and share as well. And then the capacity of the venue, roughly, so far so good to my knowledge, about 100,000. So we've gone through all of this timeline. Now let's get to specifically the surprise guest. I think it's a very, very important conversation to have about the surprise guest, which is Drake, right? I think often artists get so excited about, well, maybe not on Drake's level, because obviously Drake is a global superstar. But even if you're on Drake's level, and certainly emerging mid-tier artist, there's a tendency to want to affiliate with that big name and not thinking through all the legal liabilities that can ensue from that situation. And when it comes to event organizing, again, there's been a trend and shift where you're seeing artists wanting to cut out the middleman or woman and actually organize these events themselves. And unfortunately, both on the continent of Africa, since of course my demographic is a lot of Africans that I pay attention to, and also here in the US and other regions of the world, when artists take over, you hear all kinds of crazy stuff. Unfortunately, poorly planned concerts, people getting sexually assaulted at their events, people get in violence committed against them, among other things. And artists, if you're going to step into that role and you don't have the skill sets, don't have the relationships, and you know that you're going to be busy juggling too many things, you really need to rethink really being more focused about the money and instead outsource it to the people who know how to do this thing well. So that way you definitely reduce liability and really, really bad brand reputation, which ultimately can even bankrupt you. We're going to get to the damages later. But if, for example, I've heard about the policy, I was just reading this morning about the insurance policy limit that they had, $1 million per occurrence. That's minimal to cover all of this over 200 lawsuits with more coming through. So if, for example, you don't even have enough coverage, you're going to be bleeding out of your pocket for purposes of being able to pay out all the settlement and certainly litigating it as well. And it's not prudent to litigate all of this kind, especially this kind of scenario. It's just not, just waste of time to do that. You definitely, bad PR, bad overall. You want to quickly settle this kind of claim out. So, so very, very important to emphasize, particularly if you are an artist that's going to be appearing alongside a big artist, or you're going to be opening act for a main artist, et cetera, dot your I's, cross your T's, ensure you have your lawyers review that contract, ensure that the appropriate clause is written into that contract that protects you in case of scenarios like this. And if you're organizing the event, then you know there's a lot more, and you definitely need to dot your I's and cross your T's, and ensure as well that the people you're teaming up with, partnering with, truly know what they're doing. The last thing I would say as to this point is, often when companies grow so big, if you're focusing on what Live Nation has been doing, buying venues all over the place, sometimes part of what happens as you grow bigger and bigger and do a lot of those mergers and acquisitions and getting companies everywhere is the inability to really, really oversee, and a lot of cracks that happen because you're not really running a tight ship as maybe you would if you weren't so big. And that creates a lot of legal liability as well. So big is not always necessarily better. per se, because it does come with a lot of risk, especially if you don't have a handle on it, even being that big. So let's go right here. We've talked about the 9 p.m. All right, the other group that I want, or the other party defendant I want to talk about is Apple Music. And I think Apple Music is a very interesting defendant that's pulled into it. They're based here in California, Cupertino Bay Area. And you would say, why is Apple being dragged into this? Well, guess what? The liability issue is not limited to the concert promoters or to the artists performing or to the venue owners or to the producers. It extends to the advertisers as well. And the argument that's being made here is that not only was Apple Music involved in advertising and streaming the event online, but that because of Apple Music as well, the way the venue was organized to please and respond to Apple's demand on how it wanted the venue structured so that it could properly live stream the show. And that as a result of doing that, Apple's equipment, Apple's staff got in the way of ticket holders being able to even escape when they were when the whole stampede occurred, and also when the injuries were occurring and when the whole surge was occurring as well. Very interesting argument. It makes sense to me, and that's brilliant. They would pull Apple in, obviously deep pockets as well. Deep pockets meaning most of the people you're seeing that are are the defendants are the ones who have the money. That's who you would go after, because they're the ones that can obviously compensate your client for the wrong or injuries they have suffered. So what responsibility, if you are an advertiser and you want to get into this kinds of relationships, which happens all the time in the industry, what are you supposed to do? You definitely want to dot your I's and cross your T's as well, because the more control and among other things that you have in the venue, and you're saying this should be here, this should be done here, this should be done here, when things like this happen, you certainly get pulled into that lawsuit as well and face legal liability. All right, so then let's focus in on the legal causes of action. So there've been so many claims filed, I think over 200 lawsuits and counting, most of them in Texas. I haven't seen anything outside of Texas just yet. And a lot of the claims, the vast majority of the claims are negligence claims. And we're going to break it down just a little bit on what all of that entails. Let's see here. In terms of negligence, there have been several categories of negligence, if you will. So there've been premise liability, actions by third parties, of course, the wrongful death actions as well. But what I want to focus on is just overall negligence claim and how this plays out and what some of the allegations are of exhibition of negligence. And it goes back to Mfun's great point that he said about double check the safety measures in place. That definitely comes into play as well with respect to negligence. So legal cause of action here, negligence. What is negligence? Essentially, in order to prove negligence, there are four key elements or essential elements you have to prove, whether you're in Texas, California, or many of the states around the country that have that theory of negligence, and actually overseas as well. So the UK market, Nigeria, Ghana, among others, some of the jurisdictions I talked about we're seeing a lot of traction with respect to our podcast listening and viewership. So negligence, you have to show a duty of care, that a defendant had a duty of care to ensure that a particular injury or harm that has come on the plaintiff will not occur. Why is that duty of care? Because the law imposes that duty of care on the defendant in order for them to act a certain way. And in addition, depending on the kind of relationship that a defendant may have with the plaintiff, there might be what's called a special duty of care. So it's not enough for you to just have ordinary duty of care, but based on the relationship you may have, a parent-child, for example, among other types of relationship, employer-employee kind of situation, maybe that special relationship is even more heightened. So there's a special relationship rather than just ordinary care that you would have. So then you have that duty of care. And the duty of care standard is based on what a prudent, reasonable person would do under those circumstances, what a prudent, reasonable person would do. And that's generally the standard of what determines what that duty of care is. So duty of care, based on all of these key facts we've already talked about, would it be prudent, or would a reasonable, prudent person have ensured that they, for example, double check everything, maybe stop the show knowing that people were already getting injured that much? And even after the fact, when they're informed at 9 p.m. and Travis Scott is still on stage performing, would they have stopped the show in order to get immediate medical attention for the victims who were being injured or who had been injured? Certainly it would seem to be yes, right? That's what a reasonable, prudent person would be. So how do you violate or breach that duty of care? How you violate and breach that duty of care is some of what we've been talking about, but even more specific, some of the allegations that have been made on the complaints that have been filed so far in Harris County include lack of adequate safety procedures. So you breach the duty of care because you didn't have the adequate safety procedures. You didn't have adequate number of security personnel. You didn't have adequate training of the personnel. You didn't have adequate crowd control measures, which is why that crowd management company too is being pulled in. You didn't have sufficient number of medical personnel, which goes to William Gary's question. He was asking about, well, what's the ratio and, what's the industry custom and standard when, as it relates to concert promotion of this size, 100,000, 50,000, how much personnel or how many personnel do we match up with attendees to make sure that we have sufficient personnel? You didn't have, so you breached that duty with inadequate tools and training as well. You breached that duty, the one we're seeing everywhere in the media and hearing all media folks talk about, which is you should have stopped the performance. You should have stopped the performance. So failure to stop the performance so that plaintiffs and the injured could receive immediate attention. And then this one that is so interesting to me, I don't know that it's interesting. I've seen a lot of the plaintiff attorneys that have filed this matter make the argument that Travis Scott and just generally Drake as well, and they're of course putting it on the rest of the defendants, were encouraging and inciting the crowd to act in an insightful manner. It goes back to the initial discussion I was having about this history or trajectory 2015, 2017, that Travis Scott had allegedly engaged in behavior that was insightful and also ensuring that or encouraging the crowd to act in an insightful manner. And with respect to Drake, the argument is that you knew about this history and you still got on stage and you yourself contributed to inciting all of this violent behavior and also just chaotic behavior that led to all of this. So it's an interesting argument to me, based on the perspective I already shared, maybe the criminal defense side of me that's saying, interesting. All right, so we see a lot of when people attend concerts, rock concerts included, hip hop concerts included, long history of seeing people jump, performers jump in the crowd, or just people go crazy, or raves, etc. So we don't necessarily see some of those allegations made. So why is it unique to Travis Scott? If you know what I'm trying to say, folks, it's just like, why this is just a pattern and practice overall in the industry as it relates to music concerts, and even we've seen even a lot more. So what's so unique about Travis Scott with his particular kind of performances and his particular fans that it would be seen to be more egregious than a rave fan or rock concert, and the craziness that we know have always occurred in those kinds of settings? So certainly we'll talk about what the implication means for the industry going forward, but it is an interesting point. So we have the breach of duty and all of the listings that I talked about that constitute the breach of duty that has been alleged. And then, of course, causation is that it was a substantial factor in causing the injuries that this victims unfortunately have suffered. So therefore, obviously, damages, the last part of it, they should be compensated for damages. And the damages, if we look at what potentially could happen on the settlement side, it's not prudent, as far as I'm concerned, to go all the way to trial. It makes no sense. And of course, they say 99% of the cases now do settle, but there's no case to be made, both from a publicity standpoint and as well as the facts and the injuries, for any defendant to want to take this all the way to trial. So obviously what they want to do is damage control immediately, crisis management. You're already seeing Travis Scott trying to get ahead of it with one of the lawyers that used to be, I believe, a public official of some sorts in Maryland, and she's getting in front of it with the PR and crisis management on his behalf. I don't know if she's directly representing him in a legal capacity, but she's certainly been on TV saying he didn't know, even like it was hours later before he knew that deaths had occurred or all of this other mayhem that has happened, or even understood the gravity of what's being spoken about. So you do have the damages that will ensue from this. And generally, the idea here would be settlement, right? Now, we've seen similar types of situation, but unfortunately, just I would say even more egregious in terms of a festival that was held, an MGM International Festival that was held. I don't know if you all remember some years back. And unfortunately, a shooter went in and killed a whole bunch of people. So MGM in that particular lawsuit had over $800 million in settlement. For this particular case, I wouldn't be surprised if we have that kind of amount of money that we're talking about with respect to damages. Could be as high as 800 million in settlement easily, because of the amount of people involved, the gravity of what we're talking about, the deaths, among others. And it's still counting. We're not even done with it yet. It's still going on with more facts. Now, I haven't covered criminal negligence intentionally. I've only covered civil because, to me, the criminal negligence is still premature to talk about. There's a lot of there is an early investigation right now that's ongoing to determine whether criminal liability should essentially attach. So when that happens, certainly I'll come back and revisit that, because I think it'd be an interesting discussion. And that gives me also the latitude to get more into that legal liability side of things that I find interesting with respect to specifically Travis Scott and the legal liability that's being put on him based on his history of allegedly inciting people to behave this way at his concert. All right, so let's see what else is there to talk about that I want to talk about with you all. Okay, I want to talk about what this means for the industry. Music festivals, film festivals, fashion week shows, concert organizers, promoters, artists, designers, filmmakers. What does this mean, right? So what it means is, from where I sit, it's not enough to want to hold an event. It's not enough to want to be so excited about the beauty and the visuals and all this and how it's all going to come together. It's not enough to focus on amplifying your personal brand or your business brand. So, for example, like a Travis Scott, if he's known for this kind of behavior and allegedly even raps about it, and the argument has even been made that some of his rap lyrics should come in to pin liability on him. So it's not enough to have all of this visuals and grandiose idea of event you want to put on. You must, anytime you have events, anytime you invite people to come on to your land, to watch you perform within the context of the law, you have an absolute duty to ensure that everything there is safe. If there are dangerous conditions that you're made aware of, you immediately resolve that. If you don't, needless to say, legal liability will attach to you. And one of the reasons I put on not just music festivals, I also put on certainly film festivals, is because you might think, oh, it has to be on this huge scale, but it need not be on a huge scale. It can be certainly on a smaller scale. Fashion week shows, New York Fashion Week, and all these fashion weeks around the world, for those who might be watching in different parts of the world, certainly those on the continent as well. Those are things to be concerned about. Those are things you should be paying attention to. Promoters, oh my gosh, my office on the law firm side of things, my office gets a lot of calls from promoters who get screwed really bad, and who sometimes also the behavior of the artist really affects and really create liability for them. So it's something that promoters, you already know. It's some of the things you've had to deal with over time in the industry. You definitely want to clean things up, make things a lot tighter. Designers, filmmakers, you can't just say, "Oh, I'm exhibiting my movie here," or "I'm exhibiting my clothing at this particular show." As you see in a Drake type scenario, you can be pulled into legal action, because the argument can be, okay, you knew about this particular event organizer or producer, and their history, but nonetheless, you showed up and sanctioned the behavior as well through your own action. So all of those things can lead to legal liability. In terms of the industry at large, we've seen the Alec Baldwin type situation, which I haven't covered yet, but will be interesting as investigations continue and we see whether criminal action will be filed against him or anyone else in that particular production that we heard the Alec Baldwin unfortunate shooting of one member of a staff who was unfortunately the DP who was unfortunately killed when Alec Baldwin was handed a gun and he shot her thinking the gun wasn't loaded, but it actually was. So we're seeing all these things that we have historically said it's sort of necessary for us to produce or put out great audiovisual content or music content or performances. And we're going to definitely have those things challenged so that we can change the status quo. Because the status quo many times is not healthy overall, not only for those we're serving, but the industry at large. But we just let it go on for so long and just say, oh, that's the way it's always been. And in this instance, we're seeing obviously lawyers that are prepared to challenge that and are saying, no, it's not the case. Can't always be that way because all of these things happen. And when it happens, deaths happen, injuries happen, people's lives are really, really affected. So that's all that I have to say on this. Anyone have further comments you want to share, feel free to do so. But hopefully it's been enlightening for you. I wanted to take it on because I've been getting a lot of, I'm fascinated by the case, obviously, and I've also been getting people curious about my take as well on it. So that is my take. And pretty much we are getting ready to wrap it up. Let me tell you again how you can subscribe and reach us. Again, this was just for informational purposes. If you join at a later point, if you have a specific situation focused on you, please feel free to directly contact me at FASHIONENTLAW.com. That's my firm. But separate from here, this is just for informational purposes on African music law. For African Music Law, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter, africanmusiclaw.com. We have the dopest community made up of industry professionals, made up of your artists, among others, and just stakeholders and decision makers. And it's a community you certainly want to be a part of. You can also subscribe to the show on all major podcast streaming platforms. And I think I mentioned to you all notification about now. You can now say, Alexa, play africanmusiclaw.com. or the African Music Law Show. But I will just cross-check and be sure about that also, because I didn't get a chance to unpack that email just yet. But I'm excited that that's now available to you all. And William, I see you. I'm going to get to you in a quick second. Just briefly, everyone, feel free to rate us on Apple Podcasts and go to africanmusiclaw.com for the full scope of services, who we are, what we do. And reach out as well if you want to be a part of a guest on my show. Certainly you'll see prior streaming episodes where you can see some of the fabulous, amazing guests we've had on. All right. So William, you have something to share and you say, what's fascinating to me is prior to Travis Scott, What's fascinating to me is prior to Travis Scott was at the top of his game, it seems. Yeah, it is fascinating as well. And it's so interesting to see how not only Travis Scott, but his Kylie has, stepped in as well in terms of their response to the public and how they didn't know. And Kylie assuring that Travis is a big, loves his fans and had no clue. If he did, obviously, he would have stopped the event. But I think if I recall reading some facts that at some point he did stop and motion to areas where it appeared fans were unconscious or were passing out at some point. So if that's the case, I mean, arguably, I don't think this thing will get to trial at all. So, but if we got there, certainly that would show his state of mind and the fact that he truly did not know, as he's claiming that he did not know. Let's see here. Dom Nelson says 50,000 and 20,000 came in illegally. Very interesting. And I think that's what makes this thing so fascinating, because we keep hearing all these facts and they're still to unfold. And it would be interesting to see that. And how, to me, it's fascinating how you can have over 1,000 half of which is HPD, Houston Police Department, and then the other half security personnel. And somehow that many amount of people will come in illegally and there's no checks and balances. That really makes it very, very, very bad. And Life Nation as a brand should be like terribly embarrassed that that would happen under their watch. And that goes back to my point of when a brand gets too big, we usually think very big is amazing. Not necessarily, because a lot of this cracks happen. There's no supervision on that granular level all the way down to that staff down the value chain, and a lot of these huge liabilities do come out, and that is just terrible. So Dom, if you are actually correct, that's horrible. That is really horrible that you can have almost 1,200 personnel, about 1,200 people in terms of security and law enforcement, and that many people can just get through illegally. Wow, incredible. So anyway, thank you all for joining. Until next time, we'll see you next week, same time, 10 a.m. And I appreciate you all joining. We are officially over. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.